All right, a couple people have asked me a question, and it's a very good question about our Rune project. Just to recap, we've got these we've got a dictionary full of runes where if you type a letter, it'll give a nice little translation. And that works with a single letter. I asked you to add some other things like handling spaces and handling other characters. But there's another thing I asked you to handle, which is there's a specific rune called a thorn, and it looks kind of like a P, but the bubble is in the middle instead of the top. And it makes the th sound, the TH sound. So when you take a TH, you have to do something slightly different. Instead of 1-to-1 letter for rune, you have to say 2-to-1 combo. So how do we do that? Well, we have to intervene before this step, because if it does this step, it's going to try to put a T in there, and it's going to be wrong. Like if I do the word the, it should not look like that. It should only be 2 runes. It should be the thorn, and then this M-looking guy, which is your E, your eh sound. So we have to intervene before this, and what we have to do is peek at the next letter. We have to say, hey, what's the next one? If the current one's T and the next one is H, then we do something before we hit this. So I'm going to define next letter, and then we can say, you know, we'll use it later. And what I would like to do is say letter word I plus 1. That's the classic thing, right? When you're looping through a list or a string or a range, you want to just say like I plus 1 to go to the next thing. But we don't have I. We have not told our loop that there's a thing called I. So here's where we're going to introduce that and say, hey, we want to keep going through the items. We're not going to turn this into like I in range, but we do want to have a number. So there are a couple ways to do that. One is we could just say I equals 0, and then at the end of the loop, I plus 1, and blah, blah, blah. And that would work just fine. But there is a built-in way to do this, which is that it happens all the time if you want to go through a loop counting the items and counting a number. So there's a built-in thing, and you can say 2 things in enumerate, and then your string or list or whatever. Enumerate is super nice, and you've seen me use it before, even though it wasn't in our code HS, I don't think. It's just really cool, okay? If you didn't know that, you could still achieve it by just making a variable, like I put I equals 0 and then I plus 1 at the end of your thing. But this is just a little bit nicer. So now we have the power to track where we are with the guy and the number of the guy. So I can define next letter equals letter I plus 1. And so now I can say if letter and next letter equals TH, then we do something. Okay? You might want to put parentheses around these. It doesn't really matter. So if letter and next letter, wait, you need a double equal there, is TH, then we're going to do this thing, except we're going to add a thorn instead of using a dictionary. Later, in one of my final drafts, I made a dictionary of combos, because there are more combos than just this one. There's like double E becomes a certain rune, and WH becomes a certain rune, NG becomes a certain rune. So I made a combo dictionary, and I said, hey, let's check the combos before we check single letters, but you don't have to do that all at once. So let's get the thorn, and you'll see it autocomplete because I've Googled for this specifically a couple times, thorn rune. So I'm going to copy this little guy, since it's not in our dictionary. I'm going to say Control Shift V, give it some quotes. And now we're getting somewhere. Now, if it sees a TH, it's going to add this. Now, that's not the whole issue, as we'll see, but let's give it a shot. Oh, come on. It doesn't like that? You might have to put parentheses. Okay, so let's try the. Oh, it has a problem, which is it's doing just fine at first. It says, hey, we're on the first letter, and we're looking at the next. Well, we have one. We're on the second, we're looking at the next. Well, we have one. But then, when it gets to the last letter and it tries to look right here, then it says, hey, there is no next letter. You didn't tell me what to do if I can't find one. So I'm just going to freeze. Now, how can we get around that? There are a lot of ways. We could do try except. We could say if I is less than length or whatever. I think that's what I did in one of my examples. We could say like if I plus 1, which is the thing we care about. Sometimes when a thing is like clearly a single entity, you'll put it with no spaces instead of stretching it out. Because it's not like we're doing the math of I plus 1. It's like we're saying, hey, I plus 1 is the thing we're talking about. But it doesn't matter. If I plus 1 is greater than length, I think. I don't know. This is the kind of thing that you know what you mean, but it's hard to think about it. Let's try that. Oh. Well, it didn't quite work, but we're getting there. So at least it didn't have an error, right? It didn't say, hey, we're going too far. I'm still a little skeptical about this one. I think it might need to be greater than or equal or whatever, but I'm really bad at considering these without just hitting run to test. So let's see here. Next letter is letter word I plus 1. And if letter and next letter is T and H, then we're doing a P, or the thorn instead. Why didn't that happen? It's a good question. Maybe because this thing never happened, that's why. Okay, so now it added this guy, which is what we want. I was thinking if it's greater, then we don't do it. But really what I set up was if it's not greater, then we do it. So we need to say else, because if we add the thorn, we don't want to add either of these. So then we need to say else, do this other stuff. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Now, I think in one of my versions, I had a skip function or a skip variable where I was saying, hey, if you're doing 2 letters at a time, you need to tell it to skip the next round so it doesn't do like the thorn when it sees the TH and then it goes on to the next one and sees an H and puts that in there. Right? In this version, I think we can go without it. Let's try another word. Oh, yeah. See, we're getting a little issue of like, it's not matching everything along the way. So this is kind of messing up what we have. So let's see what happened here. You see that in this video, I'm typing stuff and then figuring out what's wrong. Where usually in class, I'll think about it for a minute before I type and don't get as many goofball errors, but that's okay. So why did it not catch the WE? Or why did it catch it and then overwrite it or something? Let's see what happens. So it's going through the word, and if I plus 1 is less than the length, we do this stuff. Oh, this else is probably like not happening as much as it should, right? We're saying if we're under a certain index, then we do this, and if we're not under a certain index, then we do this, but that's not what we want, right? We're saying if we're under a certain index, then we can check the next, but either way we want to do this. That's why I had the skip thing in mind. That's because I don't want to stop this one, but what I do want is, hey, so look, this is going to be fine at the beginning of the word. So this catches everything except it does double duty. On the TH it has the real symbol and the TH equivalence, which we don't want. So what we want to say is, if you hit this TH and you put a thorn, then skip these guys, right? We want to jump ahead. And the way to jump ahead in your current loop is to say continue. That's a thing that I hardly ever use. I'm usually more of a guy who will like rearrange it to do break and put things in a certain order that you don't have to say continue. But it works here. So this is going to solve half our problem, which is that now it skipped the T, but we also want to skip the H. And so for that, that's why, and I'm just remembering what I did a week ago, which is certainly not the only way. And if you come up with some other approach, that's totally fine. But what I did was I just made a variable called skip. And so at the beginning of the loop, we can say, if skip, then we do some stuff. We're going to turn it off because you only want to skip once. So if we're going to skip, we immediately turn it off and then continue. And that means we need to start it with something. So actually, we might not. It might be fine if you don't. Let's see what happens. Nah, it still wants it to be a thing that exists. Okay, so now this is what we needed. It's doing the whether, and actually in Old English they switched to the W and H and put the H first, so it's like wha. So that could be another combo that you add to your combo dictionary in your super fancy final version. But whether is using the thorn to make the TH sound, and it's not putting the T equivalent rune or the H equivalent rune. So that seemed like a lot, and I know if you try to pause it here and type all this, you're going to think, oh my gosh, that's so hard. But if you just do one thing at a time and say, hey, I want to look at the next, I want to try it out, I want to realize that we have to stop at the previous, or like the penultimate, and then I want to realize we got to skip sometimes. You can do it like I did, which is really sloppy, change something, be stumped for a second, change it around. Or you can do it like I usually do, which is to think for a long time before you type. And that's going to end up with the same result, just all in your head instead of on the page. So something like that is one way to achieve the goal. Like I said, in a later version, I ended up making a dictionary of combos because it's not just TH, it's WH and NG and EE and OO and some other stuff. But the TH, the thorn rune, is extremely important and common, so that's the only one I asked you to do as a requirement. So think about that.